Hello, howdy. Hi, I'm doing a painting video today where I paint a painting. It's never been done before. How do you do? Hello, 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 hi there. Today I'm showing you my process of creating a painting. The total time it took to actually create the painting was 8 hours, which is actually a lot. Usually digital paintings only take me like 3 to 4 hours, so it was doubled essentially with traditional oil painting. This is also one of the first oil paintings I've done where it was the subject had darker skin. It was interesting trying to figure out what my technique would be for that, and for the rest of the video I'll be switching between telling my process of like what I was doing while I was painting and some fun stories that I've written, so it'll be like a little bit chatty, a little ASMR-y, etc. Some of the stories, by the way, one of them is a creepypasta. It's not that scary, but viewer discretion is advised. I'll put timestamps for each story in case you don't want to listen to it. That also reminds me, sometimes my big ol' head is in the frame. Since it was my first time shooting a painting process, it's not that bad. I managed to cut out most of the footage for just like the back of my head is in frame. For the stuff that I couldn't, I'm sorry in advance. Also, bonus points to anybody who can guess which YouTubers I'm watching based off of my phone that you can see in some of the footage. It's a very chill video. I guess it makes sense because it's fall, so get a blanket, get all cuddly with a warm drink, and just enjoy. I guess let's get painting. So the first step was obviously doing the reference photo. I took these myself, just so the proportions are all proper. That's the main point of the reference photo. This is the photo I ended up using. My next step was to do some warm-up sketches. These are pretty important and nobody talks about them ever. You are supposed to do like a 15-minute warm-up before you start drawing. I went ahead and I found some poses and I just did like 30-second sketches of each of them. I wasn't going for good, I was going for make sure my hand can draw. And then I also drew a quick eyeball just to make sure that my shading was all good. And this is just so all the juices are flowing, so to speak. Okay, then I start the actual sketch. I noticed I do the weird art hand thing. I didn't know I did that until I recorded my process and I was like, wait a minute. Basic sketch, I start off just with the form and then I go in and I add where I want the details to be. This is the easy part. It's also the beginnings of my big fat head being in frame. And also me using my third hand, aka my mouth, to hold my pencil when I need to, okay? Don't judge me. I start off by just getting down where the shapes of the general things are, and then I go in and I put in the actual details of what I'm going to be drawing, and then I will put in the idea / concept of shadows. You can see me using my hands to kind of measure things out, just make sure everything's proportional. This is where this matters the most, because when you're painting digitally, you can kind of just move things around as you need to, resize things, etc., etc. But when you're painting with oil paints, you can't do that. You've lost the ability to do that. So you need to make sure all the proportions are correct before you start painting, and there are things that I wish I could change, but I cannot because it's oil paints and it's just like that forever now. So then I let the painting sit for like a whole day and I don't touch it, and then I come back the next day and I retouch and redo all my proportions with a fresh face. So that is my technique for making sure that the painting is proportional before I paint it, and it does not work because the painting was not proportional. That's my nifty little trick, is I wait at least 24 hours before I paint it just to do touch-ups to the actual sketch. Okay, then we get to the actual painting. I start off with pure black. I do not care what anybody has told you. Use pure black in your paintings. And I just go in, I mark out all the shadows, I do my underpainting with brown. And this is the first time I've ever done this. This was what I started off because I knew I wanted her to have darker skin than I usually do, and I'll actually show you when I usually stop painting and how I had to redo my process pretty much twice to make sure her skin came out as dark as it did. So I go in, I'm underpainting now, so I'm just making sure that I'm getting in all the shadows and I know where everything basically is. Keep an eye on my mug for no reasons. This also ensures that the skin tone doesn't get lost And I'm doing this with very thin layers. They're practically transparent. You can still very clearly see pen marks. You may also see random feet pop in. Those are my parents coming to check out the work, so they pop in occasionally. I also do this to ensure that things don't get lost in values. This basically just makes sure that the painting actually has some shadows and it's not all just the same value, which is very important. Here's your fun time to guess which YouTuber I'm watching, as my phone is very clearly in the shot and I just did not care. The concept for the painting was Mary. I'm gonna be honest, I'm not Catholic. I don't know a lot about her, so I did Mother Mary with zero idea what she was about. I was mainly basing it off of the song Our Lady of Sorrows by My Chemical Romance. I'm gonna be real with you. And then I begin to tone the background, and I just go in with some blues and browns just so I, again, get a general idea of what's going on. This is the first layer of the painting. I call this generally my underpainting. I'm not even sure if that's what that means. I'm not an art student. I don't know. I don't know technical terms. What do you think this is? I'm a mediocre self-taught artist. So what I'm doing here, now I'm adding my favorite 3 colors, red, white, and blue. No, red, yellow, and blue. And I'm just going in and putting these on her skin. And skin is the biggest focus when I'm painting. I like to take forever to paint it. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm going in, I'm adding my yellows, I'm adding my reds. Anyways, so the general concept for this painting was Mary looking up to the sky, and she was going to be crying. Here's footage of me being an idiot. Bonus points to anybody who's worried about my mug beforehand and was wondering if I was going to dip my brush in it. I almost did, as you saw. So I'm adding in all the tones, lots of blues. I'm putting blues where her face would be a little bit more gray, yellows where you'd see more saturation in the skin, and reds just where I want her to be rosy. I am one of those people who really over blushes the painting, so this is the second layer of the painting. She's not even that dark. I would say she has like a medium skin tone, roughly. But I wanted to ensure that I was getting nice rich colors, and to do that I did a second layer of my reds and my yellows and my blues. I'm also going in and adding a little bit of shading where it's going to be necessary, knowing that I'm going to go over it again. This is not the last layer. There are so many layers. I paint in layers. So each of these separate clips that you're going to be seeing, all of them took like 1 to 2 hours to actually paint. So this one I think took like 2 hours, roughly. And you can see me just going in, adding the basic shadows, basic lighting, basically doing what the underpainting did not do. So I did not add any real black and whites. Obviously I toned the painting, but that's very different to actually painting the shadows and painting the forms, which is what I'm doing here. I'm actually creating a shape to her face. So I'm adding lots of white, lots of black, lots of grays, and I'm kind of just trying to cut into certain parts of her face and bring certain parts of her face out. You can particularly see that in her forehead right now, where there's a very rounded sphere there, and you can tell that there's a shape now that wasn't there before. This again will improve as the layers continue. You can see how much red I like to use. It's one of my favorite colors. I'm not sure if you could tell by my head that keeps peeking into the frame. This gets worse as it goes on. The best part about this is you can see how long it took me to actually do the painting. Not just like 8 hours wise, but how many days that 8 hours was spread across because of the change in my hair color because of my dye fading. Again, I go in through the background. I'm gonna be honest, I don't paint backgrounds very often. My dad hates the background. He thinks it's very poorly done. I was kind of proud of it until he said that though, so like I thought it was fine. I guess it just depends on your definition of what makes a good background or not. As you can see, I decided to go for kind of a deserty foreground with a mountain in the background with some nice painted clouds. I struggled on the hand for a while, and then I just didn't really end up painting it either. It's just like roughly painted so you get the idea of a hand. Everybody stop panicking, it's fine, it's part of the process. I put on a layer of white. This kind of just blends all of those bright, vivid colors and kind of just grays them out a little bit, mutes them just a tad. And this is usually where I stop with my paintings, because it's fine, but I wanted her to have darker skin, so I had to do a couple more layers. But this just blends everything together and gives me another surface to work on. It's almost like painting on a brand new surface almost. And it's fine that she looks a little bit flat. Again, I'm gonna go in for another layer. There's a lot of layers to this process, so it's fine that she looks a little bit flat now. It's completely fine. This was just to blend all the colors together. Okay, and then this is where I touch up on the painting. And I would do this for pretty much any painting. I go in, I revive some of the colors that have been toned down by the white. I revamp the shadows and make sure they pop. I get a nice contrast to the painting as a whole. And this is really where things start to repeat in terms of the steps. I decided to go over it again like I did with the white, but instead of white I used brown and black, and then I went through again, revamped it, added some final touches and highlights, and then finally added the bloody tears. So this is the creepypasta, so I will go ahead and throw in the timestamp for when to skip ahead, and it's entitled My Grandmother Victoria. The story technically begins decades earlier, even before my own traumatizing event. My many great-grandmother Victoria had gone missing. I'm not 100% of the fact and fiction of the story. By the time I had heard it, the game of telephone had already been played. Victoria had been a sweet young girl, about 12 when it happened. They lived in the same house I did. We all called it the family house. It had been built in the middle of nowhere, the town being built to the east of it later. When Victoria lived there, the town would have been even smaller than it is now, which is saying quite a bit. West of the house was pure woods. She'd been rather outdoorsy, so when she announced that she was going to be exploring, her parents weren't alarmed. They weren't even too worried when she hadn't arrived by the time the sun had set, figuring it was taking her a bit to make her way back. By the next day, however, they were certain Victoria had gone missing. I heard she was gone a week. My cousin heard she was gone for months. When I eventually took to the library to get a solid answer, they hadn't provided. In the end, I suppose it didn't matter. Victoria had walked into the woods and hadn't walked out. At this point in the story, my mother would begin the lectures of stranger danger and being safe while going out. Fair, considering the story is about a young girl going missing. Victoria had eventually walked out of the woods. Oddly, her clothes and hair had been perfect, near identical to what they had looked like when she had walked in. No mud or dirt, not even a run in her tights. Victoria had been covered in small cuts and bruises, similar to the one she'd have running through the thick woods, given the young girl's insistence that she had been alone, that she had just gotten lost. The case was closed pretty quickly, despite all of the inconsistencies. The biggest one being how exactly her eyes had changed color. Victoria had gone into the woods with dull blue eyes, similar to her parents and her brother, and had walked out with vivid green ones. Mistaken identity had been brought up, but besides the eyes, the girl looked exactly like Victoria and knew the layout of the house. No, everyone figured that if a child's hair could go from blonde to brown when entering adulthood, who's to say that Victoria's eyes hadn't simply gone through a similar process? My mom used magic to explain it to me when I was a kid. A fairy or a kind witch had blessed Victoria's eyes to help her find her way home. As her grandchild, I was blessed with the same gift, whereas my cousin, born from Victoria's brother, had the dull blue. Overall, not a bad story. But I was so curious about Victoria. I was researching. When I couldn't take it anymore, I finally went to search for answers the hard way. I went into the woods. I was maybe 15, teenage confidence convincing me I would be able to find something that the search parties and later investigations couldn't. To be fair to my younger self, I did attempt to be smart about it. Bring a compass, a knife, some food and water in case it got stuck out there a little longer than I expected. I walked into the woods early. I remember seeing the morning dew on the leaves. I remember not wanting to be in the woods at night, which is why it's so frustrating that the rest is so hazy. I walked in, went west, attempting to get into the head of a small child, trying to guess which way she would have gone when I realized my legs were aching. that I was deeper in the woods than I had ever been, when I realized the sun was going to set soon. I remember being so calm. I don't even remember wondering how I had walked for miles in what felt like a blink of an eye. I just grabbed my compass and started heading east towards where I knew the house would be. I hadn't brought a flashlight with me, figuring I would be out of the woods long before dark. So I was grateful when I saw the cabin. It was old and small. I could list the reasons that it makes sense for me to have stayed calm. I must have walked to the edges of the next town, or maybe my house wasn't actually the only house that was built west to the town. But those are both lies. Lies I knew then and lies I know now. The next town over wasn't for hundreds of miles, and given that my house was known as the most west house to the neighborhood kids, I can confidently say that whoever built the cabin didn't want anybody to know about it. I really don't understand why I was so calm. The cabin was empty, and given that it was so small, I wasn't worried about anyone else hiding in there after I had searched it. It was finally starting to get dark, so I figured I would light a fire in the fireplace and wait till light to continue my journey. I wasn't planning on sleeping or anything, so I assumed I would be mostly safe. The cabin was extremely tiny. Only 2 rooms, the main room with the fire and something else that functioned as a bedroom. I guess that I had either completely missed the outhouse or it had been destroyed. Everything was actually pretty cozy, and I might have even fallen asleep if not for the knock at the door. I'd been sure to latch it, even shove a branch under the handle and draw the curtains so nothing could get in. I was inclined to believe my mother about a blessing. Another knock sounded, and then, "Hello? Is anyone there?" A girl's voice. A rather young one by the sound of it. It actually calmed me down a bit. I wasn't going to let her stay out there by herself. Plus, if some wild murderer in the woods was that good at imitating a child's voice, well then, they frankly earned the right to murder me. I opened the door to nothing. Absolute, empty darkness. "Hello?" My own voice was so full of terror, I remember it sounding foreign to my ears. Nothing. I shut the door. It had been my mind playing tricks on me then. Staring at the fire in a new odd place had caused it to want to scare me shitless, apparently. I was suddenly grateful for my knife as I decided to snoop around the house to distract myself. The main room had some bookshelves and a really old couch. The only thing on the wall was a painting, hanging directly opposite the window. The light from it must have caused some of the details to fade, but it was clearly a face with red lips and blue eyes. It was clear that whoever had been painted had been relatively pretty. I turned my attention to the bookshelf, sifting through the decaying books that must have been popular when they were put there, but now lost to time and trends. I came across a binder, one of the leather ones that used for scrapbooking, and I hoped to maybe be able to recognize someone's relatives from the small town I was from. It had freaked me out a bit when I found it to be mostly empty. You never see old, mainly unused picture books. They're always filled with stuff. There were some pictures, but they were mainly the woods around the cabin, nature shots. Finally, after digging around a bit, I came across a young girl. Someone I recognized. Victoria. Her eyes were their original near gray-blue, and she had a look of absolute terror on her face. I knew that something bad had happened to her, but it still hurt to see the evidence of it. The cabin I had currently been sitting in stood behind her, which, was terrifying. And there was even a face in the window, details obscured by distance and glass, but I knew it was the painting. The painting that had green eyes instead of blue. Again, terrifying. But that wasn't what caused the hairs to stand up on the back of my neck. No. That was caused by the breathing I heard. So alike to mine that I almost convinced myself it was, but no. It was out of sync by a hair. I turned toward towards the painting. The painting that had clearly had green eyes in the photo. Green eyes like mine. But now, they were blue. I don't know why I said it, but I guess I recognized those eyes. Victoria? A tear rolled from those painted eyes, and I ran out of the cabin. I guess I knew somehow which way was east even in the dark. To this day, I would have sworn something was following me. Not to catch me, just to watch. I felt the warm breath, but I didn't turn around, not even when I heard something that could have been my name. The doctors say it was trauma. I had been in those woods 4 days, and my brain was blocking what actually happened with false memories. Given the loss of time and, frankly, unbelievable events, I was inclined to believe them. The event left me with some cuts and bruises from my The event left me with some cuts and bruises from my mad dash, yet my clothes and hair had been completely unharmed. I had become a story just like my grandmother. I got over it eventually, until last month. My cousin, who I mentioned earlier, needed some bone cells from a genetic relative. As we had grown up together and were relatively close, I volunteered. It's odd. When he looked at me with his blue eyes into my green ones, I knew what he was going to say. I was directly related to Victoria, and he to her brother. And yet, we were not a genetic match. Whatever had walked out of those woods, it hadn't been Victoria. And that's the end of the creepypasta. Oh, he's already on camera. Oh, sweetheart. I couldn't zoom out. Ooh, hello. Oh, Ruth, hello. Yeah. Okay. You're so naughty.